and welcome to Mirador Television. We are the biggest little TV in the world, based in Lewes, East Sussex in England. Our aim is to entertain and to spice things up a little. We will also keep an eye on the local politics, because let's face it, someone has to. Our programs range from stories about the local people to stories about people from all the way across the pond. Brought to you by our wonderful colleagues in New York. So why not sit back, relax with your favourite cuppa, or maybe your favourite tipple, and enjoy. This is Mirador Television.
Indeed, it is Mirador Television, and if it seems a little scratchy this morning, it's because we are experimenting. We are outside broadcasting, right? Yeah, we're out in the wonderful, I don't know, have a look behind me if you can. There is the River Ouse, and I'm on the bridge over the Ouse, and this bridge in itself has got tons of history going back to 1264. But it is a beautiful part of the country and of the town. And just over there is the Harvey's Brewery, famous throughout the world, and certainly the centerpiece of this particular town. It's been standing idle, like many things, for almost a year, I suppose. Yesterday was the anniversary, and we will soon, hopefully, because Boris is absolutely adamant that we keep an eye on the schedule to end lockdown and to make sure that not only do we follow that schedule, but that we bring it forward if possible. However, there are a couple of things which are unfortunate in the news that might make that a bit difficult. One is that there are still all sorts of virus variants trotting around. Every time we seem to stamp on one, another one arises. It's like that game where you hit a little thing on the head with a mallet and it pops up in another hole. Well, been to a fairground if you've never played that. But the other thing is, of course, is that there is this absolute row in the European Union about the supply of COVID vaccine to Britain. And Boris is about to make an appeal to European politicians and saying, come on, stop playing silly buggers. Isn't it time that we actually sat down and behaved like adults about this? And apparently it appears, according to the news things this morning, out of Germany, that Angela Merkel is going along with him and saying, yeah, come on, this is nonsense. Let me just tell you a little bit about where we're broadcasting from. Can you see in the background? Yeah, you can. There's the river, and that's the River Ouse. Now, we're all very fond of saying, after 1066, we weren't invaded. We've never been invaded. Well, we have. And the French, during the 100 Years' War in the 1300s, sailed up this river and they laid waste to Lewes and hoisted their flag. And it was, for a few moments in time, the French owned Lewes. They also raided a whole host of places along the coast. Hastings, Eastbourne, Seaford. In fact, in the church here, one of the local churches, St. Michael's, there is the helmet to St. Nicholas Pelham, who was known in those days as a very famous man because he would gather his troops. And remember, we didn't have a national army as such. The king just went and saw the various lords and said, I need a bit of your army. And old Nick got into trouble because he told the king to step off on one occasion. He couldn't have his cavalry. Anyway, Nicholas Pelham went down to Seaford and he fought off the French. And the helmet that he had is still proudly owned by the church. There is an effigy of he and his wife praying on the wall of the church. And all in all, dear old Nick was something of a local hero. And all because from time to time we're invaded. But on the time that they actually sailed up the Ouse, the French sailed up the Ouse, they actually pulled away the armies or the fighting men from Lewis to go down to Rottingdean, which is a little community on the coast not very far from here, but was owned by Lewis Priory. So it was up to the prior to actually defend it. And off he marched because they set fire to Rottingdean. But it was a ruse, and they were waiting for him, and they not only defeated him, but they sent him back to France and held him hostage for a couple of years. Then they sailed up the Ouse, and they attacked the Priory, because the Priory here in those days, it's only a shell now, but in those days was a very, very wealthy Priory, and the loot was worth having a go at. And it is said that 200 English bowmen, and even the French said that they were terrific in terms of their bravery and so on and so forth. The English bowmen saw off the French, and they saved the day, as it were, and eventually the French retreated. But there are some pretty horrific stories. You know, in those days, there was no Geneva Convention as to how you should treat, whether you observe it or not. There's no Geneva Convention. And there is one horrific story of where a lady, because she was a good-looking lady, was raped by the French soldiers, and raped to the point where she was actually she died from the attentions. So if you think that we're in a bad scene at the moment with rioting, I'm afraid that medieval warfare was pretty rough, and a lot of it took place exactly where I'm standing, on the bridge which joins two communities really. One is Lewis proper, and the other is the area known as Cliff, which at one time was a bustling port. Oh, it's done it all, this little town of Lewis, of 17,000 people. It's a marvelous little town. And we thought this morning we should come out into the streets, because it looked like a decent sort of day, and I have no idea. Let's see what the weather said, because it's been much the same throughout the week. Well, there you are. It is almost accurate, except it's not going to be as gusty. The wind is a light breeze. And I normally look out of the studio at this time and look at the tree, my famous tree, to see whether what the wind is doing. And this morning I've got dozens of trees to look at, and they all look fairly placid. A little bit of movement, yes, a soft, gentle breeze, but nothing to get too concerned about. It's a bit sharp out. I'm finding that my hands, grasping the phone that I'm broadcasting from, are getting just a little bit tingly on the end. And of course, you know, outside broadcasts are very complicated things. We've got two great big trucks down there on Cliff High Street, and 100 people running around with various cameras. No, we haven't. Nowadays, outside broadcasts can be achieved, faults and all, with just a phone, a little bit of software, and a guy. And at this time of the morning, the guy happens to be me. So right from the heart of historic Lewis, we're broadcasting to you. And the news, as I said, is really over COVID again. Can we ever get away from it? Let's hope so. Let's hope that in a year's time we'll be saying, do you remember when? But you know, one of the things that is really upsetting me, and there were riots again in Bristol, by the way. The police had to confront rioters in Bristol. And it's very sad. People don't seem to learn any sort of lessons. But nonetheless, there we go. They decided to protest. It mostly started as peaceful, but it never stays that way. It always turns into something that's not at all pleasant. I'm just wandering across the road here, across the bridge. At the Battle of Lewes in 1264, some of the king's men, when Henry III's troops were being defeated by Simon de Montfort, who is heading up the dissident barons, they got onto this bridge. Wasn't much like that in those days, but they got onto this bridge and they panicked and they jammed, and they were just mincemeat for their pursuing knights and men at arms, and were butchered. So this has not been always a placid, peaceful town. If you actually look over my shoulder, I'm sorry to do it this way, but I'm just afraid of switching the cameras, because if you switch the cameras and it doesn't work, getting back is absolute hell. So because this is our first one and this is an experiment this morning, I'm just making sure that we don't do anything stupid and lose the whole damn thing. But as you can probably see, now converted to flats and restaurants and things, but you can see that those were warehouses at the time when this particular part of the River Ouse and Lewes was a very busy port. It was an important port, and in fact it slit its own throat, because on the barges it brought up clay to build the railway in the 1800s, and once the railway was built, nobody wanted the barges anymore. So Lewes as a port declined, although it is an important junction to this day for the railway. If you want to go to Hastings in the east, you come through Lewes. If you want to go to Brighton, you come through Lewes. If you want to go to Seaford and New Haven, the important port of New Haven, you've got to come through Lewes. And if you want to go to London, you've got to come through Lewes. So even though the port, or at least the ships and the barges, put an end to Lewes as a port, the importance as a junction remains through the railways. So it's rather a pleasant morning this morning. There's a couple of little boats down there. It's low tide. This is a tidal river, and it sways right through the heart of Lewes. And about 2 miles north of here is a village, or it's not even a village anymore. It's actually, what do we call it, a hamlet, I suppose, just a few scattered buildings, called Hamsey. And the people of Hamsey got the plague. They were infected by the plague. And rather than, so it is said, because there is no written evidence, but this is handed down, so it is said, is they put blackthorn around the village to stop the villagers getting out, because it was quite a thriving village. I thought we were going to lose ourselves there, but no. I think we've got somebody watching us. It's wonderful. I can't see who, and I'm sorry I can't this morning. Just in case it's Gary, who is a faithful viewer, but there are other people as well. And Vegan, if you happen to check in, Paul Fowle is very, very interested in having a chat to you. He spends some going on in the Balkans, and I suggested that you might be the chap to talk to, and also Mohammed Hamiti, who was the Kosovo ambassador to London, and a very good ambassador he was. It just shows you politics, right? You get a really good ambassador, and what do? For patronage purposes, you give the job to somebody else. That's how our masters work, and it's really a great pity that we can't seem to get good people in post. When we do away with them, because strangely enough, and hopefully, yeah, we go. There we go. We're back again. But I belong to an ambassadors or ex-ambassadors dining club, not because I'm an ex-ambassador, but because I'm well-travelled, and I know some of them from my travels abroad. We seem to put some very strange people into post in many parts of the world. But one, Rory O'Connell, is given the post of our ambassador, the UK ambassador to Kosovo in Pristina. And what a hell of a job he did. A terrific job. Now, let me tell you now, Rory and I do not always see eye to eye about things. In fact, sometimes we have even crossed. Wild. There we go. We're back again. I do apologise if this is going to happen throughout the morning, but it was worth the experiment, I think. And we have been going for 50 minutes. I know we haven't. We've been going for 20 minutes now. I think that the sort of thing that we are able to do throughout the summer is to broadcast from various places in Lewis, which is, as a town, so historic, you have no idea. I started to talk about Hamsey, and eventually the villagers starved to death because they couldn't get out and nobody could get in, and that was because of the bubonic plague. And those people who actually managed to survive started another little village called Offham, which is now pronounced Opham, and that village is a thriving little village today, not very far from Lewis, and it has its roots way back to the time of the plague. Lewis. It's a very pretty town. It's a nice town to live in. Well, it was. I got a bit upset yesterday, and I'm upset this morning because one of the things that we are plagued with at the moment is fake news. Right? Well, that's been used by politicians and even media for a good many years. Part of this fake news, unfortunately, is because people just pluck stuff off the internet and use it as if it's fact. When they have no idea whether it is or it isn't. And I'm afraid that the people of Lewis are starting to, because it's a bit of a gossipy town anyway, and we've got either new people who are young and so used to just believing anything that they see on the internet, or whether we are seeing people who unfortunately don't understand when you pass on information that you should pass on accurate information, because if you don't, what you're doing is you're spreading calumny, they say, calumny, and you're making sure that we get all sorts of nasty stuff spread in our community. It's, well, if you want to be responsible for that, if you want to be responsible for undermining your own community, by all means, go ahead. But when eventually people catch on to you and they start to get spiteful with you, you remember the day that you got carried away. By all means, use the internet, use the information you get, but check it out. The old adage for journalists was for 3 independent sources. 3 independent sources. They just do it as a response to something that they see on the internet. Well, if people can be so boneheaded as to do that, let them get on with it. But don't, if they're being so self-righteous and trying to point out, well, you're not. All you're doing is you're spreading misinformation, and you're stopping various projects from going ahead, which means that some people in the community who otherwise would have a job won't. If you can live with that, fine. So some of you can. And some of you will justify it. You'll rationalize it. But the fact is, if you spread fake news can be very damaging. So stop it. Well, Harvey's Brewery is one of the things about Harvey's Brewery is it's known almost everywhere in the world, and it particularly still makes a Russian beer and exports it to. I'm not sure whether it exports it totally to Russia, but it did export it to the old Soviet Union because it was made for the Russian prisoners. Amongst its colourful history, in the Crimea War, which is about 1840 or so, the number of prisoners, Russian prisoners, along with some of their Finnish crewmen, were held here in the naval prison, now knocked down, unfortunately. Well, perhaps fortunately, it wasn't a pleasant place. And they were held here, and the monument to those who lost their lives, and mostly because, once again, because of a pandemic, there was a bad case of flu. The naval prison was not a nice place. It was cold and it was damp, and it was easy to catch all sorts of bugs. And it killed several of the crew people. But the Tsar built, or paid to have built, it's a monument, I suppose. A monument in the churchyard of St. John sub Castro, which backs onto where the prison was. In those days, backed onto the prison. And it's quite a magnificent item. And it's there in memory of those Russian prisoners who gave their lives. Now, one of the interesting things about the Russian prisoners was that the naval ratings, the ordinary seaman, the ordinary soldier, was held in that prison. The officers had furlough, familiar name, furlough, and they were able to wander around the town. And indeed, they were invited by the better off families to have supper and dinner and to parties. As one historian said recently, the Russian officers knew how to dance, and the British officers were all two left feet. So they were invited to all the posh parties and all the posh balls. I mean, can you imagine that happening today? No, you can't. So there were some civil things in the past. Let us remind you who we are, shall we? So that it gives me a chance to just get my tonsils going. Well, I think. are back in the heart of Lewis. Outside broadcast, Mirador Television, here we come. What the heck? No expense spared. No expense spared and no effort made to be at least different and unusual. I think that probably there is some delivery problems this morning, and we'll probably take a look at that, because it's going to be good to broadcast from the streets of Lewis throughout the summer, because there's lots to talk about. If we broadcast from the castle, it's a tremendous history there. It's the River Ouse, tremendous history here on the Ouse. And one of the things that happens when we have lockdown is there is a raft race where groups of people build their own raft, and they leave here from Lewis with people helping them with bags of flour and feeding them with water to fruit and so on. And they make their way down to New Haven, which is at the mouth of the Ouse, was a very important port, and in fact it's never ceased being a port. If you want to go to France, that's where you go. You go down and you get on the ferry, and it takes you across to Dieppe. A favourite port, I may say, Dieppe, of my wife's, because she was Canadian, and it's where the Canadian forces were sent on a raid to Dieppe, and a lot of life was lost. And New Haven has not forgotten. And in a little park just on the edge, there's a flagpole which quite often has the Canadian flag flying, and there is a memory, and a little service is held once a year to those brave Canadian men who set off from New Haven, many of them not to return. And those that went killed were held prisoners in prison war camps. I went over to Dieppe just before lockdown. I go for a couple of days occasionally, because I don't get much of a holiday. Popping onto the ferry and staying a couple of days in Dieppe is not a bad break. The sad thing is that at one time the French in Dieppe would have little Canadian flags out in the windows. They made a great deal and a great fuss of the fact that the Canadians came tried to release them, tried to get them out from under the German yoke. The fact that they failed so gloriously is remembered. But that seems not to be taking place anymore. It is a generational thing, we don't want to remember these things, or we don't think they're worthwhile. If you don't put things into context, you're in a real problem, because then you have no idea what your generation is doing compared to those who have helped them and been heroes in the past. So there you are. That is a raft race from here down to New Haven. And incidentally, one of the interesting things about New Haven is that in the First World War, it had a lot of Chinese. The Chinese were neutral in the First World War, so they weren't allowed to provide troops to either side. But what they did with the ports is they sent workers, so that another little thing, right? The banks, they don't mind. Bung it out, disturb what somebody's doing. Right. Oh dear. Lost my train of thought now, haven't I? Because suddenly I started to concentrate on things I shouldn't concentrate on, and I should have ignored. But that's the trouble with social media, is we tend to have our minds focused on one thing, and then the focus is broken, and we go and we listen to something else. But I think I was talking about Dieppe and the fact that they remember and did remember for the longest time in a very physical way the bravery of the Canadian troops. Nice place, Dieppe. Oh, I was talking about the Chinese, that's right. During the First World War, there was a whole host of Chinese laborers were sent to help keep the forts going. Because the Chinese couldn't supply troops, but they could supply labor. And there was a whole Chinese community in New Haven. No indication got along very well with the locals, and it just shows that some of the nonsense that we hear and get up to with ethnicity being a problem, it's just rubbish. It's just rubbish. That very thing that people get all snotty about, the very things that sometimes have saved us. And we're grateful that they saved us. It's 4 minutes past 8, by the way, and I hope that this, well, we'll check later, that this outside broadcast is working this morning. And if it's not, then we'll see if we can put it right. But for the moment, it might be nice just to take a walk down the road and see what's going on. But one of the things that I think it would be rather nice is if we show you the what we saw as the bustling town that Lewis was before lockdown. Yeah. Well, there you are. That's how bustling it was. Well, it's not like that at the moment. There's a lovely man here who's putting out seed for the pigeons. Yeah, and he's making sure that they're fed for the day. Very nice gesture it is too. Sort of thing you can expect in Lewis, I think. Yeah. Right. Okay. Let's walk down into the precinct because life is beginning to come back together. There's a bit of movement, and this is having been down here at this time during lockdown. I know that it can be very, very lonely and very, very sparsely populated. But this morning, I think people are beginning to realise that perhaps we're going to get out of lockdown, whatever that means. Life is going to change anyway, and we're not going to have to look at the four walls. So people are at let's see what time is it? It's 8:07. It's near as damn it anyway because that's how long we've been on the air. So and we don't lose the signal. And here we are. That there's a place called the Bakehouse. I think you can see it. Yeah. This man is a friend. Coffee first thing in the morning. Unfortunately, once again, if I go in, I shall break the signal, and that will never do. But perhaps we'll come back and have a cup of coffee when we're off the air in a little while. Uh, um, actually, what is the time? Oh, it's uh, 6 minutes, 7 minutes past uh, uh, um, 8 o'clock, and the town is getting going. And I'm in the what is known as the precinct, and there are some gentlemen who actually sell vegetables here, fresh vegetables, first thing in the morning. And we'll go and see what they've got, shall we? Yeah, right. So, yeah, happy to see this. And if you're watching, but those people in Lewis will know that there is a. I'm trying hard to show. Here's the vegetable, fruit and vegetable, and they really magnificent, very fresh, very good quality. That here, 2 or 3 times a week anyway, I think, and a very good range. And they have kept going through lockdown in chicory and leeks. And, I love potatoes with dirt on them. Of vegetables and fruits. And, yeah, and they have nice little chats, you see. And they come down to shop. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
It's an Italian variety of open lettuce.
Oh, cherry tomatoes on the vine are wonderful, and fennel. I was quite adult before I actually tried fennel. One of the nice things is if you're having a dinner party, which not many people do nowadays, and you put fennel into iced water, it's great for cleaning the palate between courses. And asparagus. Oh my goodness me, asparagus is just one of the most marvellous things as far as I'm concerned. I just love asparagus. I'm sounding like another ordinary broadcaster, aren't I? But nonetheless, it is nice to see that these things are available here. And here we get to the fruit: peaches, strawberries, grapes, plums.
Good morning.
Good morning. There we go. There's a good morning from a gentleman. Mirador Television brings it to you all. Apples, rhubarb, pomegranates. Goodness gracious me. Biblical. And pears and oranges and lemons. So it is. I mean, it's a long, very, very good fresh fruit. If you are, and if you're not from Lewis, I'm sure that you've got something similar in your own backyard. Right, okay, it's yes, going on. 13 minutes past 8, and we are broadcasting live as it's an experiment. We have no idea until I check back later to see whether it's worked or not. But we are trying hard to do different things and to bring you a little taste of this wonderful little town, which is the county town. It's the county town. And it was very important in its day. It's not so important now because big communities have grown up around it and it's so easy to get to and fro from London. But in its day, during the English Civil War, for instance, in the 1500s, is the royalists who held The towns further, Arundel and other towns further to the west, needed to establish a bridgehead in East Sussex if they were to win the war with Cromwell. And they set out to take Lewes because it was the key Cromwellian town here. It was a key Puritan town. And they got as far as Haywards Heath, which most people didn't know existed in those days. Most people think that Haywards Heath only sprang up because of the railway. Well, it certainly developed because of the railway, but no, it was in existence in the 1500s. And the Battle of Munster Green, or the Battle of Haywards Heath, as it became to be known, took place there between the Royalists and the Cromwellians. The Cromwellians defeated the Royalists, who had to creep back with their tail between their legs, and as a consequence, Lewes was saved, and the course of the war was altered, if you like. And that was the reason that we had a republic for 14 years under Oliver Cromwell. It was a distant relative of his, going back to the early 1500s, named Thomas Cromwell. And Thomas Cromwell was a thug, and he curried favour with Henry VIII, and he pulled down the priory here when Henry wanted to get rid of all vestiges of Roman Catholicism after he'd broken with Rome. And he then chose a wife, Anne of Cleves, for Henry, and it was a big, big mistake. Henry took one look at her and said, I couldn't possibly go to bed with that woman. Now, Cromwell didn't lose his head over that, but he did lose it a little later because he made many enemies. And the moment that he made a mistake, they hauled him off to the Tower, and he had his head cut off. And pretty gruesome it was too, because it said that the executioner, and in those days, just the same as most people don't want to be an executioner today, is people didn't want to be an executioner. It was a way of making money. So they used to get roaring drunk, so they don't vaguely remember that they'd hacked somebody's head off. But anyway, the executioner was so drunk, he took 3 hacks to sever Thomas's head from his body, and there must have been a very, very nasty way to die. Not a very nice man, but you don't wish that on anybody. Hey, there we are. I think perhaps we just take a moment, and we'll let you know who helps me. Come along. Come along.
When you've missed the train, don't despair. Have a nice cup of coffee. And perhaps a mince pie. At the Runaway on Lewes Station. After that, why worry about the next train? The Runaway on Lewes Station. Relaxation beyond compare.
Well, here we are broadcasting from the centre of Lewis this morning, our first effort at an outside broadcast. Our good friend Sean Elias was watching for a little while there. If you're still watching, good morning, Sean. And it's lovely to have you back in the fold. We've had some traumatic times in our television history. We're trying very hard to come through them unscathed so that we can carry on. Not easy. And actually, some people just not very happy situation at all. I keep on getting little messages that flash up on the screen, and they block out what I'm supposed to be saying. So if I seem to go just a bit off track, it's because I'm trying to talk over some of the messages that come up, and I suppose that's the drawback of broadcasting on a phone. But isn't it magnificent? In my early days in broadcasting, if we wanted to do this, just to come into town and simply have a chat, we would have needed 2 big trucks, several cameras, a whole team of perhaps 14 or 15 people, and it would have been a traumatic exercise and able to go wrong. That's one thing in common with today. Things are able to go wrong. We very much find that with computers and streaming and so on, it's not perfect. But it's perfect enough for us to have had a go at broadcasting live this morning, and when we analyse it, we'll see whether it's something that we should be doing regularly, as long as the weather is okay. I'm not sitting out here in the rain for anybody, but in the morning this morning it's sharp. Yeah, my fingers are tingling, but nonetheless, it's not bad. And I would say to you, get out. Now is the time to get out. Oh, by the way, just remember that this weekend is when the clocks go forward or backwards or whatever, but they change. So don't get caught napping. Either you turn up at church an hour after the sermon, which sometimes is a blessing, or sometimes an hour before the sermon, so you've got a lot of time to put in. And at one time you can go and have a coffee, but now you can't because the coffee shops aren't open yet. But we're heading towards that situation. 2 areas of concern. One, there are variants now creeping in and trying to get around the defences that we put up to try and make sure that variants don't affect whether we can come out of lockdown or not. The other is that Angela Merkel is siding with Boris Johnson and is going to take on Brussels. See, that is partly the problem is the elected officials, which we should have in a democracy, in the EU have to go and fight an elite, an unelected elite in Brussels. And this is a prime example of where it just simply doesn't work. But anyway, Angela and Boris are back on stream again. They love one another and they're trying very hard to get the vaccine and make sure it's not, the supplies aren't going to be affected. It is rather sad because we were doing so very well. I've had my first one, and I'm supposed to have a second one, nobody's told me. So I've just been quite patient. But, so far I've been okay. And so I sure know it's 24 minutes, is it? Yes, it's 24 minutes after 8 o'clock. And we have managed to get through without any major disaster. An hour, Mirador's first hour, which we do every day, every weekday. And we've done it from outside. So we've done our first outside broadcast. And let's hope that it worked all right. There is a certain spring in people's steps this morning, and it's very nice that there is a feel, a good feel. Unfortunately, of course, in any community, there are idiots, and we've got them here as well. Those people who they spread fake news. They wouldn't admit that that's what they're doing. They get onto their high horse and they're very righteous about things. And of course, once people are very righteous and on their high horse, they never admit that they've made a mistake or that they should go back. So if you're going to use social media and you're going to use information off social media, if you want to use it for your own purposes, that's fine. Then what you can do is you can, whether you made a mistake or not, is entirely up to you. But if you're actually going to start to use fake news publicly, then be careful, because the consequences can be pretty severe. That's my little rant for the morning. So we'll be prepared to say goodbye. We're broadcasting from the River Ouse in the middle of Lewis. Beautiful river, a very historic river. It starts somewhere up near Forest Row, I think, and it seeps its way down until it's quite a mighty river when it hits the port at Newhaven. And it has, because sometimes in floods and so on, it changes the alliance, not the alliance, but the alignment of the river. It's not always where it's supposed to be. So sometimes Seaford was a good port, sometimes Newhaven was a good port. Well, it's settled down now that Seaford is more or less a dormitory town to Lewis, and that Newhaven is the port where you go to get the ferry if you want to go across to Dieppe and into France that way. I do. I like going in that way. It's a 4-hour ferry ride as opposed to a 30-minute one. Then the romance of travel has always been with me. I spent 5 days and 4 nights on the Dominion, which is what the express was called from Montreal to Vancouver in the 1950s, late 1950s. And that was some journey. Can't do it now because there are so many other swift ways of doing things. But it had a romance. It was a wonderful thing to have done, and I'm glad that I did it. And I also went down the St. Lawrence on an ocean liner and saw from the river the communities along the banks. Most notably, there were aluminium churches where various communities, which would be mostly in Quebec Catholic, had put up their own church, and the easiest thing was to buy an assembly line church. Is put it up, and there you've got an instant Sunday outlet. I'm ranting a wee bit, only because we're coming to the end of an experiment, and I'm quite anxious to go and see what the experiment has done, whether it worked, whether in fact you can hear anything that we've been saying. But we kept going for an hour because all the indicators say that it's still there. So till tomorrow, when if this has worked and it's nice, we might well decide that we're going to do it again. We would like to do it throughout the summer because there's so much of history that we can actually stand and broadcast it. And I can tell most of the stories, which are well worthwhile taking a look. So that's it for the moment. Let's remind you who we are. Well, somebody's going to remind you in a moment. Come on. Well, that's it for this morning. It is now, it's 8:31. My goodness me, we overran. Till tomorrow, toodle pip.